What if I told you that World War IV has already begun? Not World War III, World War IV. Garry Kasparov has often said that in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, we're already in World War IV. And the logic makes a lot of sense. In the eyes of Russia, World War III began immediately after World War II. How else can we explain what we saw in the Cuban Missile Crisis, in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas, the multiple revolutions that we saw in Africa, the footwork of the Soviet Union and the US in the Middle East, the wars in Asia, Vietnam, North Korea? They didn't occur in isolation. That was a global war in the eyes of Russia. Now, Russia believes it lost that war. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. However, it believes what is occurring today, that's part of World War IV. And though we didn't see a huge mushroom cloud, we see the other signs of it. We see the missile drills, the cyber attacks, the network of military pacts. And all of this is why, as I've argued many times, in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, Ukraine is not a war. Ukraine is a battle, an important battle, but just a battle in a global war. And the war, though, is not limited to Europe. The war has a different center. It's the Pacific. In May 2025, Chinese warships carried out live naval drills in the Tasman Sea, just east of Australia. What was the result? Civilian air traffic was rerouted, international norms shattered, and a clear message was being sent to the Chinese, to us, if we were listening. We are no longer testing, we are now preparing. You know what happened that exact same week? The United States deployed B-52 bombers to Guam, American territory, to reinforce its forward strike capacity. And at the same time, Russia did something too. It sent 295 strategic bombers that flew near U.S. Pacific territories, and it did exactly what it had done throughout the Cold War. It echoed that. It echoed the intimidation, trying to show that it can do it, and you know what? The West won't do anything about it. That's why today we see the attacks across the Indo-Pacific. The cyber attacks are escalating. The targeting of fuel infrastructure is increasing. Port logistics is being targeted. Undersea cables are being disrupted. All of this is happening. And it is not a drill. It is a dress rehearsal. China and Russia are two authoritarian regimes that are not united by a singular ideology, but their shared disdain for us. And their certitude that because we lack resolve, they can do what they wish. They're trying that now, as we see in Ukraine, but they're also trying it in the Pacific. And though China nor Russia were provoked, they were not backed into a corner of the Pacific. We are responsible for starting this war. And the reason is simple. It's because our enemies saw hesitation. They saw our division. And they seized the opportunity because they saw what they perceive as weakness. As we very well know from history, dictators do not wait for consensus. They act when they see weakness. And central to this war that is coming is not NATO. It's Australia, it's New Zealand, it's Canada, and it's the United States. And you may wonder, why Pacific? Why now? Or I'm a European, why do I care? Because this region is the center of gravity for global power. Consider this. Over 40% of world trade, that's nearly 3.4 trillion annually, it goes through the South China Sea. It is the home for the world's most critical undersea internet cables, most critical space assets, and some of the greatest maritime choke points in the world. And that's why every microchip from Taiwan, every tanker from the Gulf to Tokyo moves through these waters. So, as it was during the Cold War, where controlling Berlin meant controlling Europe, Today we see that controlling the Pacific means you control the future. And others have already recognized that. China is not building airstrips on coral reefs like we see on Fiery Cross Reef for defensive purposes. It's doing that to weaponize geography. It is literally turning reefs into runways. China is looking to turn sea lanes into the front lines of this war. In 2023, China surpassed the US in naval ship count. They're not building a defensive fleet. They did not build over 370 warships to have a defensive fleet. That's a fleet for projection, coercion, and control. Fortunately, don't move too slowly. Washington did see it coming. In 2011, recall that President Obama announced the pivot to Asia. In 2018, Trump's national defense strategy called both China and Russia revisionist powers. And in 2022, the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy called this region, quote, the most consequential for America's future. What we confront now is a new axis, a military and strategic convergence of China and Russia. And this is not a Cold War. This is not like the Cold War. It's far more dangerous. During the Cold War, recall, China and the USSR were rivals. Today, they are totally synchronized. In 2025, China launched the full-scale simulations of airstrikes around Taiwan. They were rehearsing for an invasion. Russian spy planes have been intercepted near U.S. carrier groups across the Pacific. In 2022, recall that Russia and China signed a communique announcing a partnership without limits. And Russia brings to this equation a lot of things, including real combat experience. China is learning from the Ukraine war. They are training on what they see happening in the Ukraine war. The advent of drones is not something that only in the West we talk about. They talk about it a lot too, and they share with them the technology and the understanding as to what works, what does not work, and how to do what they want to do better. Currently, the Chinese share with the Russians satellite imagery, cyber warfare tools, industrial capital. They're not looking at having simply a diplomatic relationship. It's a war pact, and that war pact is aimed at us. Just like in the 1930s, the Axis powers, they're not interested in defending territory. They're interested in a greater vision of redefining the world order, and they intend to do that using force, not as an abstract, as something that is materializing today. So overall, what should we do? What should we focus on? It's time that we focus on what's necessary for our defense. What's necessary for our defense, we already have, but we must build more of. There's a strategic tapestry, a network of allies and outposts that currently together work to form the spine of deterrence, the strong base of deterrence across the Pacific. And ultimately, it's not about just one nation, because the Pacific is massive. It's not something that one nation can do. It's about building a shared defense architecture across the Pacific. And we see that. We see Guam, for instance. Guam anchors long-range U.S. air power. It houses B-52s. It has the THAAD missiles defense. Palau and the Marshall Islands obviously are supporting U.S. radars. They have the missile tracking. Papua New Guinea has the Lumbron Naval Base, which is built by both the U.S. and Australia together, which is so key for securing the northern approaches to the Coral Sea. Micronesia, Fiji, Samoa are working together. Why? They lie astride the strategic shipping lanes. They are lying next to the undersea cables. They are key. Few people that do not live near the Pacific appreciate how important they are, or even where they are, but they're important. But even more important is Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand are not outliers. They are the very pillars in this regional security structure. And together, all of these are working. These sites form a web of deterrence. However, like any sort of web, if just one node is compromised, the entire structure is then threatened. Now, Russian history has taught them a lesson, a very important lesson, of why the Pacific is not to be ignored or to be treated as a backwater. The Pacific is key. So, if you read Russian history, you will often read about the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. And in that war, Russia underestimated Pacific power. Back then, Japan was rising, but was very disciplined. And at the Battle of Tsushima, it humbled the Russian Navy. It defeated the Russian Navy. It crushed the Russian Navy. And the defeat sparked unrest back in Russia. That was key, many historians will argue, and I will support, as to a turning point when the Tsar lost public support. That was a key moment leading to his eventual downfall about a decade later. But what caused that loss? That was not simply something that occurred in the seas. That was a loss that was caused by arrogance, failure to adapt, overreach, and repeating that error is something that Russia does not wish to repeat. They have learned that history. Russia makes a lot of errors. We see that today in Ukraine. But for the Pacific, that part of history, they've taken note. That's down in their history books. Now, in 1941, we saw the U.S. also underestimate the Pacific. The U.S. underestimated Japan's island hopping, the militarization of the Pacific. The result was eventually we got Pearl Harbor. Now today, in 2025, we're watching this unfold again in real time. So, do we learn the lesson of history? Certainly, we cannot afford deja vu. We are standing on a historic geopolitical fault line. And as anybody in the Pacific knows, fault lines don't ask permission before they rupture. And that's why we must do everything we can to address what our enemies view as weakness. That is, we must show them the opposite of weakness. We must show rather unity, resolve, urgency, and with that, we may still prevent catastrophe. However, if we wait, if we bicker, if we appease, we will awaken at a terrible cost to a war that we cannot afford to lose. Ultimately, authoritarians do not stop until they are stopped. And now is the time that we stop them. We put them in their place. How do we do that? Well, to begin with, we can expand joint Pacific patrols. Not just sea, but also air and cyber. How about we fortify Guam, Palau? How about the Solomons? Why aren't we doing more now to harden our undersea cables? How about our satellite constellations? How about our logistics nodes? And we need to be building new forward operating bases. Not someday, but right now. Right now is our opportunity to send a clear message through our actions and not our words that the Pacific is not for sale, nor is it undefended. It is not here to be taken. In fact, we have the alliances, the technologies, the global reach, and right now we can act. Right now, we can show that we decide the future of the Pacific, not them. Because right now, if we don't act, we're ignoring the fact that the Pacific Showdown has already begun. And history will only give us one chance to get this right. There's no redos. Thank you for listening today. I appreciate your time. Please do me one huge favor. Please like and subscribe. As always, thank you, and thank you for supporting Ukraine.